Okay, so the APPARTS assignment, let me share with you some, is a document analysis. So what you're going to do is, let me wait till it pulls up. Pick a document from those that are selected for you. They are in the syllabus, but they are also on Blackboard. So if we, sorry, let me go here. If you go to your Blackboard under assignments, you will see the guide, which you just saw, but we'll go over again. This is the link where you turn it in. So when you're done, your document's typed, you're ready to submit your paper, you click on that and it will put you through the steps to upload it. And then this blue link right here will show you the documents. Okay, so you click on that and it will pull up many documents, right? And these are all listed in the syllabus as well. You only have to do one document, okay? So, for example, I want to pull up the parts and we'll go over exactly what this means, and then we'll do a document and do it together so you can see how this works. So for the parts and for the document analysis, we don't just want a summary of the document. We want a detailed analysis of the document, okay? So you want to discuss the author. Who created the source? What do you know about them? What do you think their point of view is? Okay? So this should be pretty standard, right? There's not a lot of objectivity to this. When you're looking at these documents, remember that you're looking at the original author, not an editor, not a translator, and also not Pearson or whatever search engine was used to find the document, right? We're looking at just the actual document. The second part on here is place and time. Where and when was the source produced? How might this affect the meaning of the source? Okay, and the meaning could be subjective, right? But when and where should be pretty simple. And on most documents, you're going to see a small explanation at the top in italics that tells you about the author and the time period in which they wrote it. Just remember that this is history, so it is not going to be written in 2000 or 2021, right? It's going to be written in 1500 or 1600. So just remember that you're looking for the original time in which this was produced. Now, for prior knowledge, you can use anything you already know, anything you find in the textbook, or anything you learned in the lectures. Okay, but don't Google it. I don't want to know what Google knows. I want to know what you know. Okay, and you have to put something there. I don't know is not an answer. I have no prior knowledge is also not an answer. So please make sure, you can, like I said, you can look in the textbook, you can use information from the lectures, and you can just talk about what you know prior to, reading the document about the author and the issues that the document raises. Again, this does say, symbols, don't worry about symbols. You're doing written documents. This would be if you were going to analyze a political cartoon or a graphic of some sort. All right, audience. Now this is important because this definitely affects the meaning of the source and the reliability, right? So audience is the intended audience of the writer. So whoever's creating this document has an intended audience in mind when creating the document. And this does affect the reliability of the source. For example, if you're using a government document, this is mostly to be read by the government, but also the reading public, right? These documents are not written with history students of 2021 in mind. Okay, you are not the intended audience. But if you're doing something like a poem, which we're about to do, that's published, again, it's written for the English-speaking reading public. Okay, and again, reading public is important because in the 1600s, literacy was not as high as it is today, okay, by far. Also, when you're looking at things like Christopher Columbus's letter to the King and Queen of Spain, is he going to be completely honest with this? Is he going to tell them the good and the bad? Or is he just going to tell them the good things? Right? So these are his sponsors, these are the people paying him. So we need to make sure that you keep that in mind. He may or may not be all that honest with them. On the other hand, if you're looking at a diary entry, right, the intended audience is nobody. The intended audience is yourself. So you might find more accurate information in a diary entry or more personal information than you would in a letter to your parents, for example, right? So the intended audience plays a big role in the reliability of the source and the information that you're getting. Okay, the reason for the document. So why is this document produced? And this is different from the main idea and significance. The reason is, for example, if we're writing, sorry, a letter to our parents, and for example, I'm thinking of this Freethorn letter from the 1600s. He's an indentured servant writing to his parents. The content of the letter shows you he's writing because he's starving and he desperately needs help. That's the reason, right? Christopher Columbus writing to the King and Queen of Spain. The reason is, to report his findings, to report the success of his mission, if you will, and to report back to his sponsors. Right? So that's a reason. You're looking for a reason people wrote it. The main idea, however, is where you can include a small amount of summary. So this could be just a brief synopsis, one paragraph at most, of the summary of the document. What point is the source trying to convey? And last but not least is significance. So why is the source important? Why are we even looking at this, 600 years later, 500 years later? And this, again, is different from the main idea and the reason. If we look, for example, I keep talking about Christopher Columbus's entry back to the King and Queen of Spain. It's significant because he is relating what he sees, and while he may be putting a good spin on it, he is still recording evidence of what is partaking in the New World. And what we look at really, and what his documents have been very significant for, is populations. So we're talking about, he mentions, how many Native Americans there are, Amerindians there, and we know that within 200 years that population has fallen, right? So significance is asking, why is this document so very important? Okay. So let's go ahead and do a document together so that you can kind of see how this plays out. And the one that I'm going to use as an example is written by a British poet. So Rudyard Kipling. And you can see kind of the imperialism in there. So I'm going to go ahead and just read it. I am going to read the italics up top so that you kind of get an idea where we're going with this. So one, again, it shows you it was published in McClure's magazine, February 1899 is the first time it is viewed in public. Okay. The first time it's published. It's a very famous poem by Rudyard Kipling. He also writes The Jungle Book, which you're probably more familiar with. But, all right, one of the great questions occupying the U.S. public at the turn of the 20th century was the fate of the Philippines following the U.S. victory in the Spanish-American War. In 1896, Filipino nationalists had revolted against Spanish rule, led by Emilio Aguinaldo. The Nationalists supported the United States when it declared war against Spain in April 1898. In June, Aguinaldo declared Filipino independence, and in January 1899, he was elected president. However, the United States refused to recognize the new government. Feeling betrayed, Aguinaldo declared war on the United States in February. The ensuing debate regarding the appropriate policy toward the Philippines throughout the nation and the wider world was heated, pitting imperialists against anti-imperialists. Rudyard Kipling, the famous British author and poet, had lived for many years in India as a child while his father was in the British service. His imperialist childhood undoubtedly influenced his opinion of U.S. intervention in the Philippines. And side notes, Aguinaldo was captured in March 1901 and declared his allegiance to the United States, although many people doubted his sincerity. In the war between the United States and Filipino nationalists, which lasted until 1902, more than 40,000 Filipinos and 4,000 Americans lost their lives. The United States finally granted Filipino independence on July 4th, 1946. Okay, so we know that Rudyard Kipling grew up in a system of imperialism. And here is his poem in, say, regards to the debate of imperialism for the United States. The White Man's Burden. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best you breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness, on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught sullen peoples, half deviled and half child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror, and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit, and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine, and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly, bring all your hope to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread, go make them with your living, and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden, and reap his old reward, the blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of hosts ye humor, slowly toward the light, why brought ye us from bondage, our beloved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom, to cloak your weariness. But all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent sullen peoples shall weigh your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy ungrudged praise, comes now to search your manhood through all the thankless years, cold-edged and dear-bought wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Okay, so he says quite a bit there. We'll start with author, right? We know that it's Rudyard Kipling. We know that he was brought up in imperialism, so that definitely impacted his thoughts on imperialism and his point of view. He is pro, well, let's just say he's writing of the trappings of imperialism. Okay. Place and time. Well, what is the author's point of view? While he may support imperialism, he also feels that it is thankless and that it will not be appreciated, right? Place and time, we know this is 1899. He's British, so he probably wrote it in Britain, and we know that he's writing it about the Spanish-American War and the Filipino War, fight for independence. It affects the meaning of the source because during this time period, right, imperialism, especially in Britain, was all the rage. And it was, under Queen Victoria, a few hundred years earlier, the British Empire was the largest in the world. Okay, so it's very much that. You could also meld that into prior knowledge, right? We know that the British Empire existed. We know that they went into, every continent. They had territories on every continent in the world. They were large. And we know that he grew up, right? You can use that information that's on the document. He grew up in India during British imperialism. He watched it firsthand. And you can use all of this information in prior knowledge, either from the document itself, from our lectures, or from the textbook. Okay. And then going on to audience, from whom was the source created and how might this affect the reliability of the source? Okay, so this is a poem and it's published in a magazine, a very common magazine. So it's for the English speaking reading public. Okay, and it definitely does affect the reliability of the source, or it affects the meaning because most English speaking reading people are going to be either United States citizens or British citizens, and they are going to, in some way, agree with imperialism, right? The reason it seems to be, if you look through the poem, that he is pointing out that you are going to invest through imperialism, you're going to invest a lot of lives, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of toil, and it's going to be thankless. And he uses some pretty graphic language to demonstrate this. If we go back, he compares, Aboriginal people, which is basically just natives of whatever area you're in, as captives, fluttered, wild, half devil, half child, um, that you're going to seek another's profit, you're not going to gain anything, you're going to get rid of famine, you're going to help them with medicine, bring all your hope, but sloth and heathen folly, right? He calls them heathen. Sloth is laziness. Um, for ports that you're not going to be able to come in, for roads that you can't drive on, you're going to, young men are going to die in this service of doing this, and you will be blamed and hated, right? And they will ask you why you brought us from bondage. In his opinion, um, uncivilized or Aboriginal people are in bondage or uncivilized. So he used some pretty graphic language to describe Aboriginal people versus imperialists, and that this is going to cost a lot and you will not be thanked for it. Right? So the reason he's warning the United States of the trappings of imperialism. Okay? And then the main idea. That's where you can kind of summarize what he's saying. And you can include how he discusses Aboriginal people, what he believes imperialism does. He has a pretty rose-colored glasses view of imperialism. He thinks that they go in and make everything better, and they don't get any profit, which is a lie. But the main idea is where you start to summarize his ideas of the poem. And then significance. It is important to read this and understand kind of how imperialists thought, how the British thought, and was imperialism ingrained in their culture? Was it ingrained in American culture that you're somehow better than other civilizations, that you are better than Aboriginal peoples, or more civilized, etc.? Okay, do you guys have any questions about how to do this? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.